Hey guys, welcome back to Katie's Book Nook. My name is Katie and I am here today to do a discussion video. So I actually filmed this last week, but it was so scattered, so I wanted to film it again. I mean, no promises that this is going to be organized, but I just feel better about it. You can probably still hear in my voice, but I had a bit of a cold last week or 2 weeks ago or whenever it was, and I'm finally feeling like a human again, so I figured perfect time to film. So, I want to talk to you about books that I call palate cleansers. So, just a little bit of a background. I've always loved historical fiction. I started reading American Girl when I was probably 6 or 7. I was pretty young, and I had to power through them because I was not allowed. My parents were so crazy with certain things, and I love that, but I was not allowed to get an American Girl doll until I had read all of the books that were out at the time and could tell them which doll I wanted and why, and then Santa could bring the doll. So it was pretty intense. So at the time, the dolls that were out were Felicity, Kirsten, Addie, Samantha, and Molly. So there were 5 American Girl dolls out at the time, and I was obsessed with Pioneers because really, in the 1990s, we had Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, we had Little House on the Prairie reruns, the Oregon Trail games, so it was a good time for Pioneers. So I also had blonde hair and blue eyes, so Kirsten was the doll for me, and that kind of sparked my love for historical fiction and just for reading too, because it was really cool. All of the accessories, I'm a nerd about this, but all the accessories that the American Girl dolls had related back to the books and had historical significance. So for a little nerd that's 8, that's the coolest thing in the world. And, I held on to all that stuff. It's at my parents' house. But yeah, it's just it definitely made me more excited to learn about history. So, as I got a little bit older, I was 7 when the version of Little Women with Winona Ryder and Susan Sarandon came out. So I probably didn't watch that until I was about 9 or 10. But that definitely sparked my love further. So I also was raised on old movies. My mom loves classic Hollywood, and so do I. So, all of the big movie musicals we always grew up loving. So it kind of, those, and anything with Katharine Hepburn. So there's a Katharine Hepburn version of Little Women that I also watched growing up. Yeah, I loved historical fiction. So as I got older, I kind of wanted to branch into other types of books that were maybe classics or took place in the past in some which way. So some of these covers are hideous, and they're my old ones. So this is my copy of Little Women that is pretty hideous. Oh gosh, I think this was published, this version, in 2000. So I was 13 when I got this. This was my first own copy. I had one of those great illustrated classics when I was little, and then I would get it constantly out of the library, and finally I got to pick this out at the library when I was 13, and that was pretty exciting. I actually don't have, this isn't my original copy, but I had the Anne of Green Gables books, all the books that look like this. I have all my original ones over there. I actually couldn't find book 1, Anne of Green Gables. I don't know what happened to it, my original copy. I don't know if I lent it to somebody and they didn't give it back or what. So I bought this a couple years ago, but this is the same cover that I had, but it's not the same book. And I wish I still had my weird, I should get that back from my sister, my weird copy of Pride and Prejudice, but this is my pretty copy of Pride and Prejudice. So those were my favorite books when I was in middle school and high school. I was probably too young to just understand everything that was going on in Pride and Prejudice at the time. I think I read it for the first time when I was 14. So a lot of the stuff went over my head. But I love the manners. I love the way that society is run. I'm still fascinated by it. So when I was in high school, I loved Anne Rinaldi. She was my favorite author. So she wrote historical fiction with a bit of romance. These are just some of the books that I have of hers. So I have The Last Silk Dress, Hang 1,000 Trees with Ribbons, or Give Me Death, In Acquaintance with Darkness, and Cast Two Shadows. And those are just, like I said, just a snippet of the books that I have of hers. She was my favorite author, and I think she was writing books up until 2008. And if anyone has read any Anne Rinaldi, please let me know, because I think I would love to revisit them. because I haven't really read them since I was like 15 or 16. But anyway, so that they were historical fiction with a little bit of a love story built into it, and not the main part of the story, but they were definitely present. So when I was in college, one of my friends, we went to Barnes & Noble, and I was like 20, and I don't know, I wanted a book to read that was quick and not going to take up too much of my time and just was a feel-good book. So she was like an avid romance reader, and she was like, you have to read this. And I was like, I don't know about that. Like, all the other books that I had read up to the point with romance in it, it wasn't the main part of the book. And she was like, no, trust me, you'll really enjoy this. So the first one that I have, I should have taken it down, but I didn't. But it's Keegan's Lady by Catherine Anderson, I believe is her name. And that kind of started me on this whole romance kick. So my mom had some of the old, like, Harlequin romances from, like, the 80s and 90s, and I wasn't allowed to touch them, but I, of course, when I started reading them as a 20-year-old, I, like, borrowed them. She didn't know, but I took them. And that kind of started me on this romance novel kick. Now, romance novels get a lot of flack, which I think is wrong, because they're so readable. So a romance novel, let's just look. I'm like overwhelmed. Let's see here. Okay. So let's look at this book by Tessa Dare. Now this is Romancing the Duke, and it's part of the Castles Ever After series. These books are dense. And not dense in the way that, like, it's a drudge to read through them, but this is almost 400 pages. This is 370 pages. And I read this book in probably about 12 hours, not even. They're just so fun. So one good thing about romance novels, they get you into the story pretty much right away. So there's always a problem. They're very formulaic, extremely formulaic. There's always an issue. There's always a trope. There's always a heroine that doesn't always like the hero in the story. Something goes wrong. They fall in love. Something might go wrong again, and then there's a happy ending. Very formulaic. So for me, romance novels are best to read when you want something quick, and you want something happy, and you just want something fun. So Romancing the Duke is probably something that kickstarted my love for romance novels again. I actually read this only about a year ago. The romance novels that I was reading before that were the Debbie Macomber books, and they're all right. They're like very sweet contemporary romances. They're not too risque. I've read a handful of her books, and she's also just one of those authors that I read when I need to usually catch up on my Goodreads challenge. So after that, I kind of got back into historical romances. So they usually have a woman in an extravagant dress on the cover. And this one is one of my favorites. So the premise of this book is that this elderly gentleman dies, and he leaves castles to all of his goddaughters. And so she claims her castle, but there's a duke that lives there, and he doesn't know how it was sold, and blah, 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 blah. And they end up falling in love like you do in a romance novel. This is just so funny. So Tessa Dare is probably one of my favorite authors. This is one of Scott Ties the Knot. It's also part of the same series. Her books are just so fun. They're not always the most historically accurate. There are other authors that are more historically accurate. This one has, like, medieval LARPers in it, which is hilarious. But they're just so quick and compulsively readable. Now, another author that I absolutely love, and I only just started getting into her books, is Lisa Kleypas. This is actually, I think, the weakest of the 4 books that I've read by her. This is the Wallflower series. This is book 1, Secrets of a Summer Night. And the thing I like about her books is that the premise of the stories are genuinely real. So the Wallflower series is about 4 girls who tend to be wallflowers at all of the balls that they go to in their London season, and it's getting to be the point where they're either going to have to get married to anybody or be spinsters. So that truly did happen. A lot of books do talk about that. I mean, the themes are present in Jane Austen, in any classic book at the time. That was a real concern of Regency ladies. So I like the way she writes her characters. The character development is pretty good. Like I said, this is probably the weakest of the 4 in that series. But again, just compulsively readable. Now, this is an author that I just started reading as well. And I don't have all of the the books of this series, but this is the Bridgerton's prequel, and Julia Quinn is probably one of the best historical writers, historical romance writers, and probably one of the most well-known. She wrote the Bridgerton series, and this is, again, a couple of those here. And again, her plots just flow really, really nicely. Yes, they are tropey, but they're just really well done. This is a book that I read by her earlier in the summer. This is called The Girl with the Make-Believe Husband. And the heroines usually get themselves into kind of like a crazy situation. Sometimes it's a little slapsticky. But it's just fun. It's just fun. And finally, I have Eloisa James. This is just another one of the romance novelists that I want to highlight. She is also a wonderful, like, world builder, I guess, as far as historical accuracy. Now, Eloisa James is a real-life Shakespeare professor, I think at Fordham University, but I could be wrong, but I thought it was at Fordham. So her novels are really, really accurate with the way that behavior would be, and even just like little tiny historical details. So I know I kind of rushed through a bunch of different books that I like, but I do encourage you to read a historical romance. Now, my favorite is Regency romance. I really enjoy Regency romance because it's akin to Jane Austen. They generally take place in London society during the Regency era, which is probably one of my favorite time periods to learn about. And just the language and the writing is usually just so engaging. So I do encourage you to read that. So again, like I said earlier in this video, I don't know if this makes sense. I might be a little bit disjointed here, but I'm trying to urge you guys to pick up historical fiction, predominantly historical romances. So if you haven't read them and you don't think that they're your speed, I really do suggest that you give them a try. So I personally would start with Tessa Dare if I were you, or Julia Quinn would be a great place to start. They're just so good at their craft. So expect tropes. Go in. That's the other thing I wanted to say. Go in expecting the tropes to be there. Like, it's not a surprise that, you know, there's love to hate or a love triangle or whatever. There are tropes. Romance novels are tropey. They're supposed to be tropey. Everyone knows that they're tropey. So don't let that turn you off. Start engaging with the characters, enjoying the writing, and just relishing the way that the story takes you away. And that's kind of all I wanted to say today about Regency romance, historical romance. So if you've read any of those books, let me know. If you have another author that I didn't mention that you enjoy, please, leave that down below. And I hope to talk to you all very soon. Goodbye.